Here's our 3D scan. We've filled the bottom face with something in Blender, but it didn't come through with a texture. Even though this whole object is including the same material from the scan, it's coming through as black. So let's figure out why that is. First thing we want to check out is something called a UV map. And this UV map is going to be pretty crazy because this is a 3D scan, and you can see the texture file over here is also really something. You can make out kind of some of the areas that we had when we scanned it, the work table, the object itself. I'm going to hit A on this right side of our viewport, and we're in UV editing mode. Went from layout to UV editing mode. Select all. Then here you can see all of the areas where the geometry is applied to this texture, or vice versa, the texture is applied to the geometry. We can see I'll highlight it again. You can see it's really scattered everywhere. Now if we orbit down below, you can see if I select objects on the mesh, they show up here, but we're not seeing anything on the bottom of the foot that we made here. So let's see if we can select all of these. Now it's kind of going to be tricky to select them all. It might even be tedious. So let's select just a few. Okay, I don't have X-ray mode on, I've got it off. I'm just selecting a few, and I'm going to go up here to select, similar, coplanar. And let's just check that that didn't take anything extra, and sure enough, that's looking pretty good. It just took the bottom. So what we need to do is we need to now add this geometry to the UV. The UV is again the place that pulls from the textures and tells them where to go on the geometry. So how do we unwrap this foot? Let's look from the bottom, looking directly at it. Again, we can click on our view gizmo, clicking on the Z, and I'm going to go to UV, project from view. And over here, we already see this shape showing up on our material, or on our texture in our UV workspace. So let's see if anything changes over here. Let's go to our viewport shading, and we can start to see, yeah, there's some kind of texture here. I'm going to, before I click away or deselect anything, I'm going to hit G on the keyboard over here, and I'm going to move this around, and we can see, yeah, now we've got our image texture showing through. I'm also going to rotate this. I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees. I can also type in 90, and I'm going to sneak it down over here. Okay, and now it is black again. Okay, if I select everything again, you can see this is now in its own place. Now I can grab it kind of individually and move it back up here just to prove to you it is including some of our texture just in the wrong place. So I'm going to move that back to where it's in its own spot. I'm going to get out of edit mode now, go back into layout view, and we can see nothing has really changed even though our object bottom face has some UV mapping. Let's go over here to texture paint, and now it looks a lot like UV editing, except we're not playing with pointing the texture to the geometry, but we're going to be able to modify this image over here. A couple things we can do is we can just paint directly on here, and you can see where that shows up. So I'll go ahead and just color this in, and you can see quite directly how the UVs work. You can also paint directly on here. Okay, it's going to look a little strange because of how this 3D scan was unwrapped in the software. Let's go back. So now we're going to switch to a more thoughtful way to paint. This is a lot like Photoshop. We're going to click on clone. If I hold down Control and left click, okay, we can actually take a source and then use that source to paint. And you can see when I hit the edge of my texture, it's just going to go black. So we might have to do this a couple times in a couple places. So what I'm trying to do is achieve that texture. Try to have some of that color information carry on through. Let's try it another way. Let's click, control click, and now I'll look at the bottom. And because this mesh is so strange, let's just kind of maybe take a couple tries. Eventually we can kind of start to smear some of that color on the bottom, and we can go in here and literally smear that texture if we want to kind of break up the marks we made, that kind of rough clone stamping. And you know, you could also save this image, bring it back into Photoshop, and keep playing with it there. You can also do it directly here. You can also play with soften. Try to get down some of that contrast. I would always recommend you try to orient your objects as they're going to sit in 3D space. I'm not going to say this is beautiful, but it looks like it's going to pass for some kind of texture on the bottom now. Before we close Blender, we want to go up here where it says Image, Save. Save. And we can see it said Saved Image at the path where our model is kept. So now this is a permanent save. We also want to go ahead and save this as some kind of blend file now that we've got everything in here and we're starting to get organized. Let's just go back to layout mode. I like to always kind of return back to layout mode. Go to File, Save As, and I went ahead and already saved this, but you want to go ahead and give it a meaningful name and click Save As. And that's it. We've cleaned up this model, brought it in from a 3D scan, given it new textures, new UV maps.